recording now. And hi everyone, I have Matt Ginsberg here with me. He's one of the most active activists that I know from Chicago, and we are here today to chat a little bit about the coronavirus, but from three different approaches. We are gonna try to dedicate the first 10 minutes to talk about the different definitions of social distancing. Then we're gonna talk about the social and racial divide in the U.S. in the middle of the pandemic. And at the end, we're gonna talk about the U.S. imperialistic approach towards the pandemic and the cases of Honduras that Matt knows a lot, and of course the case of Venezuela that of course I know. So let's start, Matt. I believe that I'm the one that should at least start the discussion on the definition because it's something that bothers me a lot. We already talked before start the chat about it, and basically the problem that I see is that I have a lot of friends, especially in the US, that when I chat with them, they tell me that they are practicing social distancing very carefully, but then they tell me that they are going outside regularly with their kids to play and to walk in the park. And from my definition, from the definition that we use here in Venezuela on social distancing, that's not social distancing. I mean, that's something different. I mean, basically what I'm trying to say is that social distancing is like remaining at home for good, all the family, and avoiding social gatherings and family gatherings, any kind of gathering, and just going outside once or twice a week to do groceries. That's the understanding that we have of social, at least here in Venezuela, we have on social distances. I know that there are problems related to people that need to go outside because they need to find ways to survive. I know that there are problems of people that have crazy parents. All those things, people know it. People, homeless people, everything. I mean, there are thousands of reasons for people to not be at home. But those of us that have houses, at least, should try to be responsible and not going outside and really understanding that social distancing is a way to reduce the spread of getting the virus, but also the risk of spreading it among your loved ones and among others. And a lot of people don't know or don't realize that the virus remains in the air for hours. So what do you think about my worry? Am I right? Am I worrying too much, Matt?
No, I mean, I think that the statistics bear out that you're not worrying too much. I mean, if we look at the number of cases in the United States, we're now at 790,000.
Something happened to the audio. I don't hear you.
I can hear you.
I start hearing you at the beginning, but then all of a sudden the audio fainted. Somehow.
Pierre, can you hear me?
No.
No, nobody can hear me?
For some reason, I don't hear you. Do you hear Matt?
Yeah, he does. It's just you who doesn't hear me.
Maybe it's
something wrong.
Okay, go ahead. Maybe it's a problem from my side. I don't know why. But go ahead, Matt.
Okay.
Wait a second. Let me do something. Okay, keep going.
Test. Do you hear me now?
No, I don't hear you. I don't know why.
Well,
do you hear me, Jesus? No, I just turned my mic around. Okay,
Jesus, I think the problem
is that there's a problem there.
I think it's your Bluetooth.
I'm gonna mute you and I'm gonna unmute you just because I hear you at the first second you start talking, and then all of a sudden I stop listening to you.
Yeah, Jesus, it's on your end because Pierre can hear me okay. I think that it's your Bluetooth connection.
I don't know what is happening here.
Yeah. Test 1 2. You hear me, Jesus? It's on your end, your audio output. You might have to raise the volume on your computer. Raise your volume.
I don't know.
Test.
I don't see you. All right. I don't know what is happening.
Test. Can you hear me now?
Mm-mm.
No?
I don't hear you. Do you hear me?
Yeah. And Pierre hears me too.
I don't know why I don't hear you, Matt. What a crazy stuff. Let me do something here.
You gotta create a Venezuelan Zoom that works better.
Wow, this thing is...
Test. Test 2 3.
Yes, I hear them. My speakers are working, and I'm testing them, and they are working.
And we hear you okay, so your mic
Don't
is
you
working.
think, Matt, that maybe it's the other device connected to the... Because I don't see in the mic that is next to your name, the mic like moving, like, you know, like tilting.
Yeah, but on me it
now
is.
I hear you.
Okay, all right, let's go.
I just hear you for 1 second, but too far away.
Okay, can you hear me now?
No. I believe that there should be a problem with your mic there for some reason. I hear you right now, but too far away.
Because Jesus.
Now.
Okay, it's on your end because Pierre can hear me fine this whole time. So it's something with your computer.
That's fine. Let's try to keep doing it.
Okay. So to answer your question, I think that, of course, your concern is completely valid, and the statistics bear it out. We have close to 800,000 confirmed cases in the United States. That's China. At the time that we started, had only 80,000 cases. We have 42,000 deaths in the United States. We're by far the country that has seen the worst effects of this pandemic, and that despite being one of, if not the richest countries in the world. I think that you can't attribute that solely to lax following of social distancing. However, I do think that the inability of a large percentage of this population to conceive of the need to take collective action in protection of each other is related to the root cause, which is pervasive individualism as a result of the cultural and economic impact of neoliberalism in this country. I think that the for-profit healthcare system, the ways in which profit motives guide most of the fundamental institutions of US society also has cultural repercussions in that it's just, no les cabe en la mente. It won't even enter their heads. The idea for many people that they need to individually act as part of a collective for the protection of the whole. And what does that mean? That's not exclusive to left or right. That's pervasive throughout society. You're absolutely right that you still see social gatherings, you still see people in parks, You still have, what's been defined as an essential business still. You still have liquor stores open. You still have many stores that are questionable whether you could consider them to be quote unquote essential. And on top of that, now you have this sort of stark example, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's anywhere in the world where you see people protesting in the streets, literally bringing themselves to death's door in mass crowds, asking for measures that are intended to save the lives of the population to be lifted. And you see this very starkly over the weekend. There was a number of these protests around the country, and there's some images you may have seen of nurses actually getting into the streets with their respirators on, their masks on, blocking those protesters and saying, no, we're not about to let you become patients at our hospital, much less compromise the health of the rest of society. It's an inability to move beyond the individualism that has been pervasive in this country since its founding, and that has been worse and worse since the neoliberal turn of the 80s. However, I want to caution us against placing the onus on the individual, because I think that also is a response rooted in the neoliberal ideology to some extent. Really, the onus of this is on the for-profit healthcare industry. It's on the pharmaceutical companies, and it is on our governance. They are the ones that have abandoned the notion of public health, gutted public health for years, gutted any opportunity. How could you expect people to be educated on what something like social distancing might mean, much less the basics of epidemiology and the ways in which a virus spreads, when there is no public health infrastructure? The little bit of the public health infrastructure that was created through this sort of Keynesian period of social programming from the 60s, 70s on, the war on poverty, has been gutted completely and is practically non-existent at this point. And so where are people going to have access to information or health education, much less health care, in order to understand how serious it is that they not go to the parks with their children, that they not continue to treat this as a temporary thing that they can be an exception to?
Now that you're talking about that, about the individualistic approach, I believe in that. But one thing that surprised me is that I always seen the U.S. society like too individualistic. Everyone for himself. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
And at the beginning, I saw that social distancing in the U.S. was going to be very easy for U.S. citizens, because usually U.S. citizens are not like social animal like we Latinos are. You know what I'm trying to tell you? Like,
Yeah.
to be with a lot of people and hugging and kissing and everything. And it's kind of different in the U.S., and that surprised me. Because I see the nature of most Anglo-Saxons in general, they are not as social as Latinos or Black people, Africans, and even Chinese. The Chinese people are more like of being together. That's my impression, at least. So that impressed me. But I understand that what you are saying is that the approach to the crisis, to the pandemic, to the coronavirus crisis in the U.S. was very individualistic in the leadership approach. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah. So one is it was individualistic in the leadership approach. Two is we have inequality that's more vast than perhaps anywhere else in the world if you look at the scale of it. And so you have the impossibility of large segments of the population from taking measures and surviving that would promote social distancing. How is somebody that doesn't have paid sick leave going to make the determination to risk potentially people they don't know versus risking whether their family is going to eat the next day when they decide whether or not they come to work with a cold or with any symptoms, right? You have a vast layer of society without any notion of what paid sick leave is, without any notion of where to go for healthcare coverage. You have to remember that despite Obamacare, and some would say because of it, the insurance companies continue to control our healthcare system and leave us in a situation where most people are either underinsured or uninsured. and even those who do have insurance oftentimes don't seek out health care. So all of these are, again, they are individual responses that are rooted in failures by government and the corporate class in this country.
It's crazy anyway, but I just wanted to highlight that issue of the crazy social distancing in the U.S. and how I believe, at least my impression is how how that is messing up everything in the U.S. I believe that crazy approach towards social distancing mixed with the crazy backs and forwards from Donald Trump, and then the fights between governors, and that craziness on who sends the right information towards the public is part of the problem. But the things that worry me the most is that I don't see a clear solution to that problem happening. What I'm seeing is the contrary. Seems like what happened the weekend in Florida when they opened the beaches. And yesterday we were posting something in Orinoco Tribune about that, and all those photos of people going to the beach in Florida are like incredibly devastating in terms of, like, you realize that there's people that are not understanding it or something is happening. Can you tell me what you think about that?
No, I agree with you. It's madness. It's absolute madness. I think that another part of the context here is American exceptionalism and the idea, so there's various things at play, and certainly one of the major ones is the ways in which people are flaunting social distancing, girded on by the right-wing media and governors of states like Florida. I think that part of the contributing factors is very much related to American exceptionalism and this idea that, well, this doesn't apply to us, that we won't have to make individual sacrifices on behalf of the whole, that what's more important than anything is my own individual ability to go where I want, regardless of who that puts at risk, even if it's myself and my family. I have the right, damn it, right, to take these actions. The other part, and this is partly in transition to the next part of our discussion, Jesus, is to remember that there are huge swaths of our society that cannot social distance. The number one hotspot for COVID-19 in the United States right now is the Cook County Jail. How the hell do you, excuse the language, how do you social distance within a jail? These are people that are, for those who might be listening from other countries or places, these are people, the jail is where people go pre-trial, people who are not convicted of any crime, many of whom are nonviolent offenders, even if they are found guilty. Not that anybody should be incarcerated at the levels that we see in this country. Mass incarceration, as your listening audience will undoubtedly be aware of, and is worse in the United States than anywhere in the world. We have more people than China, for example, which is the country of 1 billion people. We are a quarter of their size, and yet we have vastly more people incarcerated within this country. Social distancing is impossible in the jails, and that doesn't just affect and infect the inmates. Their guards are coming and going from the jail to the communities and back. The other personnel in those spaces are coming and going. Those are huge sources of infection. And who is it that's incarcerated? It's overwhelmingly, disproportionately Black and brown people, and particularly, at least in Chicago, it's the African-American community that has faced the brunt of, not just this crisis, but historically all of the crises of the past, and has essentially lived in a permanent state of crisis. And so I think that, again, our orientation does need to be on education around how, to the extent we can, how we push back against individualism, American exceptionalism, and this right-wing madness of saying we don't need to follow these rules because, gosh darn it, I'm free. But I think the primary focus needs to be on the institutions of US life that are oriented toward profit generation and social control, and that make social distancing impossible for that reason.
Yes, we have more participants that finally are joining us. I apologize because I didn't see you before. So we have been talking a little bit about the definition of social distancing in the US, guys. I'm gonna put you on mute, and I invite you to put your to make questions in the chat room in order for us to answer it. And now we're gonna start talking about what Matt was just saying about the social divide and the problems with the jails in the US. And I have one question for you, Matt.
Jesus,
Yes.
can I interrupt for a second? Yeah, you have my camera turned off and Carlos Silva, Teresa,
Yes.
and I can't turn my camera on. So
everyone, but it's not happening. But I'm gonna start doing it right now because the idea is to focus the conversation on Matt and me. So what I'm gonna do also is try to hold on a second. Is to stop it. How are you there? Is to stop. How are you, Teresa? Is to stop the video in everyone, in all the other cameras to keep the focus on Matt and me. So my question, Matt, is can I mean how do you see I mean what is the solution to the problem in the jails right now in the middle of the pandemic? I mean, what can be done?
Decarceration. They need to be freed from the jails. That's the long.
I see that the pimp of Donald Trump was what is his name? They took him out of jail because Michael Cohen, I believe is the name of the guy, that they took him out of jail because of coronavirus, but the rest, the black people remains in jail, right?
That's correct. That's correct. In fact, that's a tendency that you're seeing in various parts of the world. Another set of people that they're talking about freeing from jail are the assassins of our comrade Berta Cáceres in Honduras. Or they're talking about letting them free. And you'll see also in the United States a number of high-profile white-collar criminals, quote unquote, people whose crimes are not related to individual acts that may have cost damage at an individual level, but are related to systemic acts that have in many cases killed thousands or millions of people because of the nature of their crimes of corruption, their crimes of stealing from the public, their crimes of any number of white-collar crimes. Those people, oftentimes, suddenly the system finds a way to decarcerate. But when it comes to a quote-unquote petty criminal, somebody who's committed a crime of survival, somebody who might have stolen for providing for their family or been selling something illegal in order to provide for their family in recognition of the fact that the system here has locked them out of the formal economy, those people are being left to die in the jail. And that's what's left us to a situation where we have approximately 215 detainees, again, people who have been convicted of no crimes, that are in the Cook County Jail and are being sentenced to death potentially, that are infected positively with COVID-19. And that's just the people reported so far. Up to 21 of them are hospitalized. 4 of them thus far have died. At least 1 guard has died. And that's just in the Cook County Jail.
I mean, can we talk about, because I mean, if you ask Donald Trump, he will tell you, no, we have been releasing people from jails. You can see Michael Cohen and this and that guy, but in terms of percentages, how do you, according to what you have read or what you know, is the percentage of the people that should be taken out of jail, at least in the Cook County, there in Chicago?
Well, personally, I'm a prison abolitionist when it comes to the U.S. I think that the carceral system in this country is not based on community safety, and I believe that there is no excuse for the prison system as it exists to continue to exist. I think we need to seek alternatives to that, but especially in the face of a pandemic and a crisis, there is nobody that should be locked away inside of an institution of that nature. Right now, we've seen there has been some release of low-level offenders on I-bonds and on electronic monitoring, but not nearly what there needs to be given the scale of the problem there. It continues to be, again, the #1 hotspot for COVID-19 in the entire country.
Okay, I got it. And in terms of the migrants, how do you see the problem? I mean, is the same thing happening as the guys that are in detention centers? How
Yep.
do you see that? Is the same approach? Is the same analysis, or?
Yeah. So let's take locally here in Chicago, one of the detention centers that houses the migrant children, the unaccompanied minors, from the recent waves, mostly from the recent waves of largely Central American and largely Honduran immigrants that have come to the border, fleeing, and it's important to mention, fleeing the consequences of U.S. foreign policy, fleeing the social deterioration in Honduras and the rest of Central America as the result of coups, as a result of support for electoral fraud, as a result of militarization. Those children have been distributed to detention centers around the country, and one of them is in Chicago. And there's been recently news that's come out that up to 40 of those young children in that detention center are also infected with COVID-19. So let's, I think that it's important to put these things in their full broad context. So let's follow the journey of one of those children. The US government that has systematically left our population in a situation completely unprotected by dismantling healthcare infrastructure, by continuing to prop up a for-profit healthcare system that denies people any basic access. Meanwhile, this whole time has been spending money on support of a dictatorship in Honduras, starting with the coup in 2009 and on through the successive electoral frauds, most blatant of which was in 2017. And a family makes a decision to send that child somewhere else, hoping that realizing that the thousands of miles that child will trek to the border, despite all of their dangers, and the tens of thousands that have died along them, are less dangerous than the situation that US foreign policy and US support of a dictator has created for them. And that child gets to the border, miraculously gets across, ends up in detention, ends up in a city like Chicago, only to then have the consequences of that lack of investment and that profit-based healthcare system then lead to them getting an infection that may take their lives in detention here. These are connected points of a single puzzle here. And besides the migrant children and the other migrants that are in detention, it's also important to remember that most of the so-called essential workers, many of them at least, are immigrants, are people that have the same exact people that the right wing, and for that matter, many of the liberals in the liberal establishment have been calling undocumented or illegals, or saying that they don't deserve $15 an hour minimum wage, and pushing back on the demands of those service workers. Those are the people right now that are delivering people's groceries. Those are the people right now that are ensuring that you have gas to put in your cars. Those are the people cleaning up after people in the hospitals who are ending up there. And so you have this, that's a huge part also of the people that are most directly exposed to COVID-19, because for them, there is no social distancing. They're at work every single day, having the people infected by COVID-19 knowingly or unknowingly come in to shop at these stores or to receive services from their other places of work.
I have a good news. The guys from Zoom just let me know that we don't have the 40 minutes restriction.
Okay.
So that's at least something positive. But anyway, let's try to keep it in the timing that we try to set up. And I believe that at this point we should move to the imperialistic approach towards the pandemic. What you were mentioning to me before going live about how the U.S. has been in their intention of diverting the attention of the terrible crisis that is looming the U.S. might be attempts to find enemies anywhere else, yes, in order to try to
spread of it at the scale it's been spread within this country did not have to take place, could have been avoided had we had responsible leadership, and more importantly, had we had a healthcare system based on meeting people's needs rather than protecting the profit of insurance and pharmaceutical corporations. And so in that context, we need to keep a close eye on the ways in which the right wing in particular, but with the liberal establishment following close behind it, is capitalizing upon this crisis to reinforce their international agenda. So you see that with in the midst of this crisis, the implementation of further blockade and coercive measures against Venezuela for daring to continue to exercise sovereignty. You see the continued support and financing of the dictatorship in Honduras, the US-backed dictatorship, which has responded to this crisis very much through military means, through using this as a pretext to further deepen the hold of the military police on sectors of Honduran society that have been resisting for many, many years. You see the utilization of this crisis to really drum up, and perhaps the most scary thing is the ways in which they are drumming up the potential of confrontation with China. And you see, Biden's first ads against Trump, unbelievably, his first ads against Trump were not about his failures to assure a robust public health infrastructure. We're not about his failures to give a consistent message to the American public about the need for social distancing. We're not about his coziness with the pharmaceutical companies and with the insurance corporations. Why? Because Biden shares that same coziness. No, his first ads against Trump have been to talk about how Trump is too close to China. And there's this argument back and forth. Who's closer to China? You are, we are. And it's part of the drumming up of this narrative of foreign culpability as opposed to domestic responsibility for the out-of-control crisis. And B, perhaps most scary, what's the traditional way in which the United States has moved out of Great Depressions, out of economic collapse? It's through war. It's through war. We don't have anymore the conception of robust social programs to get us out of economic crisis. That went away with Roosevelt and the New Deal. What we have right now, the guiding logic of both parties who are in power, is the use of war, whether there is a convenient excuse for it or not, in order to generate economic productivity. And that is what has me most scared probably of anything here, more than the failure to social distance, more than the vulnerability of so many segments of our population, although that as well, is the possibility of World War III being a result of this, as a result of the ruling classes turn towards hawkish behavior on the international stage as a potential resolution to the economic component of this crisis.
That's true, and especially today with the drop in oil prices, if you ask me, my I don't know how to say mi preocupación is in Spanish. I mean, I worry more today than yesterday because the drop in oil prices today is the worst in history. And that have a lot of implications in terms of what you were saying. Because not only because oil producing countries get affected, but because the US is one of the countries that produces one of the most expensive oil, which is the fracking, the fracking industry that keeps the oil in the US alive recently. So a lot of people are talking about that, about how this crisis in the oil prices might have an effect on us in Venezuela or maybe in Iraq. And a lot of people have been talking lately about the possibility of an escalation of the U.S. in Iraq as a way to try to attack Iran. So these are things that worry us a lot here in Venezuela, and we are very aware of that, but we need to keep moving on. But the truth is that is happening, that there is a real threat, and that the U.S. is doing something crazy because the size of the crisis, of the pandemic in the U.S. is not normal. It's like, I call it a catastrophe, because when you talk about 42,000 people in just 1 month, because those numbers start raising like 3 or 4 weeks ago, is something that should scare a lot of people. So I don't know what's going to happen because I mean, yeah, I understand that the U.S. imperialistic approach is like going to war after war and that way driving its economy and everything, but and distracting people's attention into other issues. But the fact is that in this case, it doesn't seem like rational because you are not going to get rid of the problem and people are going to keep dying in the U.S.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about that because I have the impression that people in the U.S. are not seeing properly the size of the catastrophe. Am I wrong? I'm not there and I cannot, talk about that properly, and that's what I'm asking you.
I think that you're correct, Jesus. I think that the majority of people recognize this as an unprecedented event. I mean, it is at the front of conversation everywhere, but it's not. Because it's an unprecedented event in the lifetime of most people who lived here. There's not a frame of reference to understand really the full implications of that, the full magnitude of that, and so. And that's what leads us to a situation where you have these right-wing protesters already demanding that the economy be reopened. That's what's led us to this situation. I think that we are not through the worst of this. We are in the very first part of the very first phase of this, and yeah. But that's what scares me. That's why I do focus so much on the question of U.S. imperialism and the U.S. war machine, is that I think that because of the unprecedented nature of this crisis, people are grasping at straws and more desperate in their outlook. I mean, the corporations are seeing not all of them, some are profiting off the crisis, but some of them are seeing real hits to their bottom lines. And there's going to be a mounting pressure for government action, and specifically for the drumming up of the war machine. So in the face of that, what does that mean for us and our social movements? If I could just add a note on that, I think that we have a tendency, understandably so, to want to take care of those within our networks as our primary responsibility in the short term. And it has been beautiful to see the emergence of mutual aid work and the efforts of community-based organizations and social movements to establish mechanisms through which they can help membership and connect them to resources. Just to cite one particularly beautiful example, you see thousands of teachers in the city of Chicago, part of the mighty and militant Chicago Teachers Union, pledging their stimulus checks to the parents, to the undocumented parents of their students who do not have access to that kind of relief. However, I think that it's important that as quickly and as broadly as possible, we move beyond the sense of the immediate relief-focused efforts, or at least attach to those relief-focused efforts broad-scale demands that are not limited to the borders of this country. I mean, I think this moment requires of us an internationalist framework and an internationalist response. There has been far too little attention paid to the threat to defund the World Health Organization, much less to the refusal to take testing kits from the World Health Organization early on in this crisis, which could have been a key move to stop the kind of spread that we're seeing right now. There's been far too little attention paid to the ways in which the war machine is being drummed up towards China. Far too little attention paid towards the blockades that have been imposed upon Venezuela. Far too little attention being paid to the fact that in the midst of this crisis, we're continuing to find money, not for domestic health needs, but for funding dictatorships and US puppet regimes like that in Honduras. I think that our response has to be of a global scale. You cannot, by definition, you cannot confront a pandemic without an internationalist response. And I think that too is unfortunately beyond the framework, even of many of our sectors of US social movements, right? That there have been very siloed internationalist manifestations of internationalism, but there's not a broad and a deep commitment and a deep infrastructure for people-to-people connection. And I think that, it's better late than never. We need to be building that now. We need to be linking our responses and our demands to those of movements around the world. And really, following, if you want an example, a hallmark to look at, look no further than our sister country Cuba. You know, look at the heroic response of Cuban doctors going around the world in response to this. You know, when I tell people, folks that are members of base organizations here, folks that are in the struggles here, that in Cuba your doctor comes to your home, knocks on your door, and didn't just start doing that during a pandemic, but has been doing that for years. It's something that doesn't even fit within our consciousness. And yet, if we're going to get control of this, the concept of global social medicine, the concept of a global public health response, it is essential. It's you can talk about whether it's a winnable demand in the short term or not, but winnability aside, it's what's going to be required for there to be survival on Earth. Because we have to remember, and I'm sure that this is part of the foundation of your worry, watching the U.S. response from Venezuela. What happens in the U.S. when, like the saying goes, when the U.S. catches a cold, the rest of the world, dies of a flu, right? Or dies. I can't remember the exact phrase, but what happens here is going to have tremendous implications for everybody else in the world. People in the U.S. public, unless there's a closure of the borders of other countries to folks coming in from the U.S. I always joke, but I'm not so sure it's a joke anymore, that Donald Trump might get his wall after all, just built from Mexico to keep us from going to Mexico. But in absence of that, and I can't imagine that happening in a sustained or large scale because of the dependence of so much of the world on the globalized economy, as well as on the tourist economies and the huge role U.S. citizens play. In absence of those kind of controls, the failure to control the pandemic in the United States has implications for the entire rest of the world. And so our response has to be global. It has to center demands of global public health. And we have to build internationalism to an extent that we haven't seen in, frankly, many generations.
Yes, we have. We at least me here in Venezuela. A lot of people here in Venezuela are scared of the numbers of the U.S. We see that there is like not we see. It's evident that there is a connection with the explosion of the pandemic in the U.S. With what might happen in the future in Latin America, and that scares us. And what you were saying, there should be a global approach, epidemiological approach to the problem, but what Donald Trump is doing is totally the contrary. He's basically fighting the World Health Organization, he's fighting China, he's fighting the countries or organizations that do better in terms of controlling the pandemic. So it's kind of scary because there's no leadership in the U.S. right now, and a lot of countries are used to follow the U.S. leadership, and that's a problem because there's no leadership right now in the U.S. Yes.
I just wanted to say, Jesus, that Teresa and others, it looks like in the comments, we're wondering if there will be an opening up for everybody else or for anybody else.
Yes, I think we should do it, but let's first talk a little bit about and I'm going to open the mics and the video because we don't have too many people anyway, so I'm going to do that when we finish talking about Honduras. Is that okay?
Sure. It's fine with me. I just wanted to call your attention to the chat. That's all. I wasn't sure if you're seeing it.
Finish what we schedule, and let's start talking a little bit about what you know about Honduras dealing with the crisis, and then I'm gonna say a little bit about talk a little bit about what we have been doing in Venezuela about the crisis, and then we go to the question of the panelists and comments. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay. Do you want me to start with Venezuela?
Sure. I'll share I can share briefly about Honduras, which is that, there's somewhere just under 500 reported cases, although a failure to test broadly in Honduras. And, the main points I would emphasize, I don't need to elaborate too much because I hit them earlier, but is just that the crisis is being used as an excuse to further militarize society and further deepen the control of the US-backed dictator, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who it's important that folks remember his brother is a open drug trafficker convicted as such in US federal court. So the narco state, US-backed and financed, has deepened its control over society. There has been an ineptitude of the response by them. There have been already, of course, severe acts of corruption by that government. It's important to remember that part of the backdrop to its defeat, despite its successful fraud in order to reverse the defeat in the 2017 election, was a scandal in the public health system whereby fake pharmaceutical companies were selling fake pills to the public health system, leading to the deaths of thousands, and that money was being used to finance the campaign of the dictator. And so to put that kind of a regime in charge of a response to this pandemic is shocking, to be quite honest. And then the final point to mention is just what I said earlier about, to the extent that there is any decarceration happening, because there's also a problem in the jails in Honduras, it's being used to talk about freeing the upper class and oligarchy-connected criminals, in particular the assassins of Berta Cáceres, my friend and comrade. They are behind bars right now because of international pressure and the struggle of the indigenous communities of Honduras, and there's talk about releasing those criminals.
Yes, that's what I read about that. Do you hear me okay? Because I've seen comments of people that are not hearing me okay. Should I raise my voice more?
It's something wrong with your volume, Jesus. I'm not sure what the problem is.
That's bad, but you hear me or not?
Yeah, just not well.
That's bad. It's like interrupting or what? Or too low?
It's low.
Okay, that's bad. But anyway, I'm going to try to speak louder about what we have been doing in Venezuela. I read about the case of the killers of Berta Cáceres, and that's scary. I hope that people move and put a lot of pressure in Honduras in order to try that not to happen. Talking about going now to what we have been doing in Venezuela in relation to the crisis, I can give you my personal impression. Is that President Maduro have approached the crisis in a very efficient way. We have been going into quarantine since the moment the first case was announced. And I believe that that's very important because, I mean, people are talking in the US about quarantine after, I don't know, 1,000 deaths. And that puts a lot of pressure on the numbers. And especially right now when people are now talking about opening before the crisis have even, reached its peak. So that's crazy. But in Venezuela, we have been respecting the quarantine. The government has been talking about going into 85 and 90% of respect to the quarantine. I mean, people are not going out. Businesses are not opening. Only the essential ones, groceries and production units, agribusiness, markets, and things like that are the only ones opening. People are remaining at home. Most of the people, we have exceptions. Crazy people it's all over the world. So we have some crazy hotspots in Venezuela in recent days in relation to the control of the pandemic. But we right now are talking about 252 infected cases and only 9 deaths. And we have the best numbers in terms of deaths per million inhabitants. And we have the best number in the number of deaths per million of inhabitants. And that's, those are achievements that I feel proud of because at the beginning I was very scared. And I believe that most Venezuelans are scared of the implications that a crisis in Venezuela might have on our already weakened health system, because it's a fact. Venezuela economic crisis that has been caused mainly by US sanctions and by the blockade have an enormous implication in the state of the health system in Venezuela. So I believe that that's also part of the reasons that we are showing the good numbers that that people are respecting the quarantine, because you don't have to be Chavistas or terrible situation in the country. So that's why I believe a lot of people in Venezuela are respecting the quarantine. Another thing that plays in our favor, between quotations, is the blockade of the U.S. and the U.S. sanctions. We don't have that many international flights coming to Venezuela, and that also, if you ask me, is a thing that playing in our favor because we were less exposed to the virus. But anyway, I mean, I believe that the most important thing that has been happening in Venezuela in relation to the fight of the pandemic is the decision that has been taken by President Maduro and his staff. That is a very I believe that is excellent, if you ask me. I mean, it's not only taking the decision of the quarantine, it's going to places and disinfecting the places. With brigades of people going into places to disinfect the areas that might be at risk of, being a hotspot. The other thing is that what I was telling you, the disinfection, and the house by house visits. I mean, we have been using the Patria system, which is a system that is used to pay bonuses to Venezuelans. We put a survey in that. It's a website. In that website, and I believe that the last number that I saw was like 80 million Venezuelans fill the survey, and that survey was used by the government to go house by house to do screenings of cases and to practice tests. So that's why we have one of the highest. I believe that we have the highest rate of tests per million inhabitants in Latin America because of that. And right now we are talking about doing massive tests. I mean, since last Monday, the government announced that we are doing tests house by house, disregarding if people fill the survey in the Patria system or not. So we are going to see an increase in the ratio of tests in Venezuela, and we have been doing that first because Cuba helped. We have more than 1,000 new Cuban doctors in Venezuela that was announced by President Maduro yesterday that has been helping in that house-by-house approach. Of course, there are a lot of Venezuelan doctors, but I mean, talking about 1,000-something new Cuban doctors is an important number. Disregarding, I mean, not talking about the Cuban doctors that are usually working in Venezuela in the Misión Barrio Adentro program. So that's an important thing. So, and it's also important to highlight the solidarity of China, Russia, and the World Health Organization that has been sending us tests and equipment to deal with the crisis. And without them, we might be in a terrible situation because of the U.S. blockade and U.S. sanctions. So that's part of the things that I wanted to say about the approach to the pandemic here in Venezuela, Matt. I have reading the comments of everyone because my computers put them in a very tiny letter. So if you can help me with that, Matt, I will love you forever.
So Jesus, I think I can hear you, but so, and it sounds like others aren't really able to make out what you're saying. I'm also hearing an echo of myself over there, but there's a proposal to go to question and answer from the public, and ask me to sum up.
I'm going to unmute everyone, okay?
Okay.
I'm going to unmute audio on Pierre and...
Thank you.
I
for
will be
unmuting me. Can you hear me?
I hear you, Teresa. It's nice that you could make it.
Well,
I'm
open
unmuting
this
here
thing
now.
up.
Hold on a second. I'm unmuting everyone one by one. It's kind of. Uh,
So you want me to introduce myself?
yes, Teresa, please.
Well, my name is Teresa Alameen. I'm the founder and regional director of the Southern Anti-Racism Network. It's a grassroots organization that recently celebrated its 20th anniversary. And I'm based in Columbus, Georgia, which is a home of US imperialism beginning, for Fort Benning, the place where the school of America. So I'm in Columbus, Georgia. So I'll stop there with the introduction.
That's fine. Do you have some questions or something that you want to talk with us about what we have been talking?
Yes, because, you know, in the South, I was a union organizer for many years. And what's starting to happen in this COVID-19 thing, with so many workers losing their jobs and so many workers dying on the job, that a bunch of unions have called for a national general strike. So some of us meet weekly talking about this. The strike is called for May Day.
That's
So
cool.
it's coming out of Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, with Kali Akuno and those forces. Maybe somebody on the call knows about Cooperation Jackson. But it's also coming out of New York, where the highest union density is. So we can be physical distancing, but we've got to show social solidarity in this period, because there's blood in the water and it's not ours, it's the capitalists. The robber barons are catching hell. When oil dropped down to zero today, we know this mess is in a free fall. So this is our time to be seriously organizing to help people understand why we must dismantle capitalism, imperialism, patriarchy, and white supremacy.
That's true.
See, I know what it would take for me to be free as a Black woman. If we end all those systems of oppression, then I will be free and everybody else will be free too. So that's how I roll. You know, coming out of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, in 1965. So I'm just saying, let's talk about what we're going to do about it, because I think everybody on this call is probably on the same page. So I'm with the people who are doing something in the US South, who have organizations and unions, and we're coming together in spite of the COVID-19. So I don't know what organizations people belong to on this call, but I would like to hear, because when I saw your message, I thought this was an important call for people who have revolutionary consciousness to be on this call. So let's open it up so we can hear from Cheryl and Nino and Pierre and Carlos.
That's fine.
Thank you.
I'll do it. I don't know what you think. I want to mute you, Teresa, but I want to ask Mateo what you think. Do you think that we should answer question by question, or just open the mic to the other participants too?
It's your forum, Jesus, but I would vote for opening up the mic. I've talked more than enough.
Yes, I believe that opening all the mics at once, as I did at the beginning, is kind of crazy because there's a lot of feedback. So that's why I muted back all the other participants. But
well, Jesus, people have been raising their hands. So I think Pierre raised his hand. Carlos may have raised his hand. So just start calling on people. I can stop talking talking now, so you can call on Pierre and Cheryl and the others. Thank you.
I'll do it. Thank you. Now I'm gonna let unmute Pierre. Pierre, you are on mute now.
Okay, I'll just say hi. I'm from Ottawa, Canada, and I've been involved in a lot of these things. I'm very happy to hear about a general strike, and we've talked about a lot of the issues already. And I don't know whether you can see me, but I think, Jesus, my video is not on. Oh, I just put it on. Okay, here I am. I think I can give my time now to Cheryl and Carlos and Nino, and maybe come back later, but certainly to Cheryl.
I'm gonna allow Cheryl to talk now, and I'm gonna mute you, Pierre, because of the feedback that is crazy.
Fine as a label, but
How are you?
absolutely fine. What?
Hold on.
What do we say?
Hold on.
What do we then focus?
I've just been unmuted.
How are you? Yes, I can hear you. And right now you can open the video if you feel
Oh, I have to get off, John. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Okay.
How are you, Sherry?
Talk more about this when you have time.
How is California doing? Do you hear me? Do you hear me, Jerry?
Yes, I can now.
That's fine, that's fine. Yes, introduce yourself and raise your questions, and let's see how you see that interesting proposal of like a general strike for May 1st.
The proposal, could you repeat the proposal, please?
Teresa was talking about the idea of having a general strike for May 1st. I don't know how to deal with that. I mean, I'm in Venezuela. I'm not gonna be there, but anyway, it's gonna be kind of hard to organize a strike in the middle of a quarantine. But anyway, I just wanna see what you think about it, because I believe that it's a terrible idea, and someone has to address that issue. But the problem is how you implement it. But anyway, I just want to hear you.
Okay. Can I? You want me to speak to that now?
Yes, if you want.
I would. I think, you know, I'm speaking to everybody from Michigan, and I'm sure everybody saw the demonstration that took place, the right-wing, really fascist demonstration with arms to quote unquote liberate Michigan. I think that the call for a general strike on May Day is a good one, especially if what we say is we need to encourage everybody to stay at home on May Day and to resist the right-wingers and what they're doing. There were some photographs of, you know, I don't know how real it was, but apparently some medical professionals in their scrubs stood in the street in Denver against the right wing. And, you know, these are really very positive. You know, I think that people taking their own right to determine whether they work or not at a time when the bosses are trying to push everybody back to, or, you know, except for the people who are doing the necessary work of food and deliveries and so much else. But people taking that power on their own, I certainly think that's a good thing.
I'm gonna open the mic to Nino Paglicia, that is joining also us from Canada. So I'm gonna mute you because of the background, but we are gonna open. I wanna invite you all to mute your sound, your mics, your audio. in order for me to unmute you all and then try to have a conversation, not by me muting and unmuting everyone, which is kind of hard for me and crazy, but by each one of you unmuting your audio, but then muting it back when you finish talking to avoid the feedback, which is crazy. Okay, I believe that you can talk now, Nino. Welcome.
Oh, hi, nice to see everyone and join this important meeting. Sorry that I was late to join in, and also Jesus, hermano.
It was my fault.
Hermano, no, I know. Pero hermano, me perdí muchas de tus intervenciones porque no se oía. Pero bueno, pues yo sé dónde tú estás.
Yes, I don't know what is happening with the audio. Are you listening to me right now?
Very, very faint. Yeah, very, very faint. So I can make out, short sentences, but a long speech, but anyway, but thanks to Matt, I heard him clearly, and also the other people who have contributed. A special hello to Pierre. I'm calling, and I'm here in Vancouver, Canada, and of course, I'm a Venezuelan Canadian. So I have sort of a personal stake in everything related to Venezuela, as you might understand, fully Chavista and in support of the Bolivarian revolution. So that's my sort of background. So I don't know if you want me to say anything else, but I hear, when I hear about the general strike, I'm always in favor of that, because when you have a force that's hard to break, I think the general strike accomplishes breaking down those walls, and at the same time that unites all those who are behind and trying to pull down those barriers. So I think when I hear the concept of general strike, I'm always in favor of that. I come from a communist background. I come from a solidarity background. I come from a pro-union background. So I think all of those sort of qualifies in support of a general strike. So anyway, I'll probably stop here unless you want me to say something else. Usually what I like to speak is about the sort of the larger context of things, but I don't want to get into that. That's not on topic. So thanks for now.
That's fine, yes, it's okay. Let's hear about Carlos Silva. He's a good friend from Venezuela. He's based here in Venezuela. I don't know if you hear me, Carlos. You are one of the ones that...
Te escucho con...
Okay, that's great. I don't know what happened with my audio, but si quieres hablamos español o inglés y yo traduzco como te sea más cómodo. Pero vamos a conversar sobre eso.
Okay, no, I see. Okay, bueno, saludos a todos. No, say hello to everyone. I'm Carlos Silva. I live in Caracas, Venezuela. So I really want to share about I'm worried right now about the low inventory. Here in Venezuela, I think the government is doing very well and is working good in the situation. So I am worried about the inventory because I know we are in the middle of the crisis. So we are having low inventory in gasoline, for example. I don't have gasoline in my car. I have to store my car. I can move to for example, to go to the grocery or whatever. We have problem with the inventory of food, inventory of medicine. So if this crisis is going to be by one or two more months, we're going to have very big problem to keep the people in house because we are not going to have food, for example. So this is my worry is about the balance. We know we can be in quarantine in our house, staying home. It's good politics to control the pandemic, but if the people can go to work or can go to
production.
to buy food, we are going to have a huge problem, a problem maybe more than the pandemics. If you see this virus, the COVID-19, maybe affect in very high risk to a 5% of the population. But if we don't eat, we're going to have more problems. That's my concerns, that I don't know how to do that balance between the economy and the quarantine. And you can see an example, for example, if you see the oil price. If you see the oil price, just right now, is zero. And like you know, our economy is around the oil price. So what's the future of the economy of our country if we can't sell our main products? That's the thing that I think we have to see to understand how to keep the people in home safe with food, for example, if we don't have money. And I'm talking about the countries that need money to buy food, for example.
Yes, I understand your point. I believe at the beginning, Matt and I talked a little bit about those issues, but it's my fault that I didn't see your request to joining us. But it's an important point because it takes us to the same problem that is being discussed in the US of how to balance staying at home and keep moving the economy and producing to stay alive. I believe that one of the biggest concern of everyone on earth, I believe. But if you ask me, maybe I'm telling you this because I still have a little bit of gasoline in my car. But we have been dealing in Venezuela in recent weeks with shortages of gasoline, especially in Caracas, that is not used to that. So that is true what Carlos is saying, and that is mostly caused by U.S. sanctions that has been forbidding us to buy the chemicals that are needed to refine oil and make gasoline. So that's a problem that is being raised right now. I'm just trying to let you know about those issues that I didn't mention, but one thing that I didn't get from what you said, Carlos, is the problem with food. I believe my impression of going to do groceries is that there's still a lot of food out there. But I understand that there's a lot of people that need to make money to buy that food. But have you seen scarcity lately around you? Of food, I mean. Do you hear me? Carlos?
No, I didn't understand what you said.
I'm just asking you if, I'm just telling you that I'm not seeing too much scarcity of food in Venezuela, at least around me lately. But I understand that a lot of people need to work to buy that food. But it worries me that you mentioned that there is scarcity of food. Have you seen that? Because it's not my case.
Yeah, that's the main problem. No, that's the problem. The problem in the future, in the close future, we are going to have food and in the inventory, for example, in medicine, because the economy is absolutely stopped. And like you know, a lot of people doesn't have a formal work, so they don't have money. They have to work every day to keep safe.
So basically, you are just worried about what might happen in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks or 2 months, right?
Right.
I got it. Yes, that makes sense. I mean, and I believe that is an issue that should be affecting not only Venezuelans but everyone, because somehow the production is being paralyzed by social distancing and quarantine. So I'm gonna stop talking here, and you, Mateo, let me know what do you wanna say, what do you wanna add. We have basically every one of you guys can open your mics at your discretion, and then put your mics on mute in order to avoid the feedback. But Mateo, give me your thoughts.
No, I mean, I think that we seem to be of an accord. I want to first salute the work that's being done by Teresa Caliacuno, who I know, and Cooperation Jackson in the South, and say that that very much, has, despite some fits and starts and difficulties and setbacks in the struggle, really been a guidepost for what it can look like to begin to build an alternative while continuing to resist and fight back against the capitalist white supremacist system we live in. And that I think that some of what Cooperation Jackson is doing right now in regards to turning their social productive apparatus towards meeting the needs of the people that are, and doing so in a way that also agitates us to think about why the state is incapable of and has failed to provide for the needs of the population, really posts a guidepost. I would certainly support any call for general strike. I've seen many calls for general strikes over the years. Obviously, it requires an immense level of organization to pull off, and I hope that it does. I think that there's of course huge political differences across the unions in this country, and however, I hope that there is space to really push for bolder and more militant and left action. And I'm in Chicago, to answer your question. My political work here is with a group, the way I know Jesus primarily is through a group called Southside Together Organizing for Power that organizes against shutoffs, healthcare shutoffs for health services in the South Side, against tenant organizing against displacement, gentrification. And now I do work with a group called United Working Families, not part of the Working Families Party. It's a separate Chicago-based formation, the backbone of which is the Chicago Teachers Union. And my wife is a leader in. And then internationally do my work through a collective called La Voz de los de Abajo that's primarily been doing work in solidarity with the people's movements of Honduras, but also, of course, in opposition to US imperialism more broadly. So I, really will look at your page and Cooperation Jackson's and do what I can within the spaces I am in to amplify those calls. I echo the concerns that Carlos raised. I think are important, not just in Venezuela, but elsewhere. I think that the implications of the magnitude of this economic crisis are going to require us to grapple with some things that we haven't seen in a long time, if ever, within our generations. And I think that finding the right balance between helping our peoples survive around the world and also controlling the pandemic, and more importantly, defending the gains that have been made by the social movements of the global South, in particular, Venezuela being emblematic amongst them, and continuing to push back against US imperialism, capitalism, white supremacy, all the system patriarchy that Teresa named as being the real viruses and at the center of this crisis. I appreciated really everybody's interventions. I don't think I have much to add besides lifting them up, saying that we are in all of our different realms of struggle, engaging in important work right now. And I guess my primary, if I had one takeaway point to it, it's about connecting the dots and figuring out ways that these local fight backs and national pushes can be connected to each other on an international scale. Because if ever there was a moment where the only way forward is internationalism and grassroots internationalism in particular, this is it. So I will also say my day job is at a hospital myself. I've been at a hospital every day. I do work as a Spanish interpreter. And I will just say, the scale of the crisis can't be overstated. And those of us in the healthcare realm are seeing it every single day. It's, it's a situation. I was on Honduran radio the other day, which is where, after which was when Jesus invited me to this forum to talk. I think it's unfathomable for people in many parts of the world to imagine and even for people in this country to imagine what's actually going on in our hospitals and our healthcare system right now. If this is the fundamental failure of our healthcare system is being revealed at a scale that we've never seen before. Doctors are having to decide who lives and who dies, and we all know the ways in which those decisions are filtered through these systems of oppression that we've been talking about and calling out. You know, there's not PPE. We're given 1 mask per day at the hospital I'm at, and it's not an N95 mask. I myself am home on quarantine today because the social worker who sits next to me is a confirmed case, and I myself, you may have noticed me coughing, may have COVID-19. It's everybody is exposed to this right now, and it's a crisis that's going to take global solutions that push back not just against COVID-19, but against imperialism, capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. So I will close at that because I'm actually late for another meeting. I'm so sorry, everybody.
That's fine, Matt. Thank you for allowing us to talk with you. I'm gonna keep opening the mics to everyone. Now is the turn. Pierre, let us know what you think from Montreal, from Canada, about the 2 things that has been proposed, about the general strike proposal and about the Carlos preoccupation on the balance between production and healthcare.
Well, listen, very quickly. I didn't hear everything you said, but I got the gist of what you said. Of course, general strikes and taking over, essentially trying to see if there is an opportunity, which is very hard when people are starving and dying. Just one very quick piece of information around Canada. Since 3 years now, I mean, Canada's of course always been in the imperialist stream, but since 3 years now, we have been almost 100% on the Trump line of or policy line internationally in relation to international policy, whether it be Venezuela or Saudi Arabia or anywhere else. Including Honduras, of course. And a number of us have been trying very hard, including Nino, at building a national network which hopefully will get us at least stop Canada from providing the US government with political cover internationally with the US's policies. Unfortunately, that's not happened so far. Apart from that, of course, we have a comparatively good health system. It's got some big problems in some areas, especially senior care homes where death rates are very, very high. But in other areas and in terms of getting money to people who need it in society, we appear to be working at it. Of course, the oil companies are still getting their good share. So the question then becomes how much pushback can be made here, but especially can we get some separation between the US government, whether it be Trump or Biden, and the Canadian government. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you. Let's hear Teresa or Nino or Cheryl who wants to say something. Just unmute your mics, and Pierre, please mute your mics to avoid the feedback.
Well, thank you, Jesus. I really appreciate hearing from Nino, Venezuelan in Canada. Is that what you said? Yeah, because what's going on in terms of Venezuela and the imperialist moves that the United States continues to make against Venezuela. We really do have to step up our international solidarity on that question. And I see Cheryl has unblocked Cuba. We really are fighting hard to end the Cuban blockade, especially now when the Cuban medicine is so much better than the US medicine. And for many, many, many decades since the Cuban Revolution began, Cuba has gone all over Africa doing all kinds of medical and other support for many. So we owe Cuba a great debt. So I think in this international context, with all of you international folks on the call from Canada, and Jesus, I did not hear where you're from. I know that we're friends on Facebook, but that's all I know. Where are you from?
Yes, I'm from Venezuela. I'm a Venezuelan.
Oh, you're from Venezuela too?
Yes. And I'm based
Afro-Venezuelan? Is that what they say? Afro-Venezuelan? Well, that is great. Afro-Colombians. I met so many who come to the U.S., the Afro-Hondurans and all of that. So we know what the School of Americas has been doing in those areas. And I live in the city where the School of Americas is housed at Fort Benning. And so we would do the big demonstrations there for years. And we had a conference recently there, but we haven't given up that fight. They changed the name, but they do the same thing. When you go over there in the fort, they got all the pictures of all of the people who have been doing bad stuff to folks in all the countries there. And they lift them up as great people in the U.S. military apparatus. So that's what I hope that we can continue to connect with each other around this conversation. So Jesus, when you put out another thing, I will jump on it. And so any of you, I'll be looking. So Cheryl, I don't know if we're friends on Facebook. I'm up to 5,000. So I need to unfriend some people so I can add you if we're not already friends. Because I do a lot of work on Facebook. I raise money and I organize on Facebook. That's because they use our stuff, so I use their stuff to organize and raise money. But Cheryl, I'll be looking for you on Facebook and I'll unfriend somebody so I can add you. Are you on Facebook, Cheryl?
Yes.
Good. Well, I'm counting on that. So send me a friend request.
We may already be friends, Teresa. We have mutual friends, Saladin.
Oh, yeah, where are you located?
I'm in Detroit, but often I'm in Washington, D.C., or at least I have been. I don't know what the world is going to bring us in the next months, but I'm often in Washington, D.C. doing Cuba solidarity work. But my home is in Detroit.
What do you think about?
Well, I'll be visiting Detroit next year. I was there last July for the NAACP thing.
Right.
So I got to see a lot of old comrades then. So I'm
Sure.
glad to know you're in Detroit. Thank you. Well, Jesus, let Nino say some more.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think he was trying to say some more.
Yes, Nino. Unmute your mic. Yes.
Yeah. Hello again. Yeah, well, yes, I live in Canada. I've been in this country now for 35 years. So I actually left Venezuela during the Fourth Republic, escaping the repression and the fascism of those days, 35 years ago. So anyway, I'm still here. Being in Canada, I sort of see closely what the Canadian politics is. And Pierre referred to that briefly. I want to just mention something that I think it might be relevant to defining what the role of Canada is, the Canadian government I'm referring to, in relation to Venezuela. I think that I've been describing the Canadian approach to foreign policy in relation to Venezuela as sort of the Canadian soft power that has resulted as a division of labor between Canada and the US. And this has been worked out within the OAS, the Organization of American States. Everybody will remember that the OAS tried to kick out and condemn Venezuela as being undemocratic. They tried to apply the democratic charter, forgetting the actual OAS charter that in fact prohibits, it's against its own charter to interfere and intervene in another member country. Regardless of all of that, the OAS wisely decided to abide by its own charter and therefore did not condemn Venezuela. So what happened after that? There was a division of labor. The Canadian government was tasked with co-opting those states, OAS states, that did not vote against Venezuela, whereas the US would use the strong arm approach, which is, military intervention or threats, sanctions, and all economic and financial measures against Venezuela. You can clearly see that. You see the soft power. When I say that, I say it in quotes because it still harms Venezuela, but that's what has been defined generally. So you have a soft power from Canada, and you have the strong arm power from the US. Basically, they got Venezuela in a vice. They're pressuring Venezuela from both ends with two different methods of attacking Venezuela. This is an important perspective that we have to keep in mind, because when we attack only the Canadian government, yes, we are attacking one particular policy. The Canadian government now counts as being the leader of the so-called Lima group. So we are attacking that part. And when we attack in the US, we know we are attacking the US. But let's not forget, this is one and single approach to destabilize Venezuela. So wherever we are, us in Canada, you in the US, let's forget that we're working together on this. Let's forget that this is one single approach by the imperialist US and Canada. Canada is very much imperialistic. I think Pierre actually referred to that, and he wrote a fantastic article just recently in relation to that. So we have to recognize that. I think that, when we look at the US foreign policy, as Matt was referring earlier, I think what we're seeing is basically a state, a government under Trump that's basically promoting unilateralism, nationalism, fascism, as we call it, within the United States, which, if the US agrees with that, if people vote for the likes of Trump, nationalism is not a bad thing on its own. When it becomes bad is when the nationalism is used to ostracize others. And this is the danger of what Trump is doing. I don't care about Trump's nationalism, frankly. What I care about is when that is used against Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and so on and so forth. Bolivia now. So that is the extreme danger. Now, what happens with, like in the case of Venezuela? Venezuela, and as I say, Bolivia, I think they emphasizing an aspect of nationalism. Nationalism being, hey, we want to be independent, we want to be sovereign, and therefore we guard off anybody else that wants to intervene. That's why we say hands off Venezuela.
Mhm.
But let's pay attention to this. When Trump uses the idea of nationalism, you know, that seems to be, oh, well, that's okay. Even I'm saying I don't care. But when Venezuela or Bolivia prior to the coup was using the notion of nationalism, you know, that was called communism. Down with communism, you know, it's a totally different perspective. And we have to recognize that. We have to recognize that you cannot have a double standard on what is truly sovereignty, self-determination, nationalism within those notions. And we have to condemn, in this case, the double standard that the US is creating and is promoting. Okay, I will stop there. Sorry if I spoke too long, but those are the issues that I care about. Thank you.
Do you want to say something, Cheryl?
Yeah, first I want to thank you, Jesus, for having this discussion.
Yes, no,
I think we need to.
Because of all the technical issues. I promise.
Well, you know, as we do more, the technical issues get easier. The important thing is having the political dialogue that we need so much more as we're facing the crisis. You know, we know that this global crisis is falling heaviest on the most oppressed.
Yes.
You know, the war on Venezuela, they're using the coronavirus against oppressed countries and countries that are struggling for independence. You know, here in Detroit, the Black community, I mean, you look at the statistics all across the country and who's dying. Early on, they had how they were going to do the triage. So if you had, you know, dialysis or any of those things that are so prevalent in the Black community, they were just going to not treat you if the hospitals got overloaded. But I think that it's in reference to what Nino was saying. I don't see Trump being a nationalist. I think that what's coming out of Washington really is part of the global economic crisis. Capitalism just cannot get itself going again. They've got all this money that has been flooding the international markets, and they have nothing to invest in that will get them profit. You know, there's this fundamental crisis of capitalism, and that is driving, like Matt was saying earlier, driving the US to war. This is why when Biden and Trump get together and they start talking about China, you know, I have actually personally felt for a long time that was the design of US imperialism, to have a war. They need a big war. They can't destroy enough of the productive capacity by destroying Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Syria. They can't destroy enough for them to get capitalism going again. So they want a big war like World War I and World War II, only this time they've got nuclear weapons. And it's really a time where the crisis for poor and working people, it's really going to depend on us. And this
I got you disconnected.
what kind of educating and mobilizing and working together. The left here is so divided, so divided. We need to find ways, and see, this is why this discussion is important, because it brings together people who, you know, may have known each other's names, but didn't have an opportunity to talk to each other. And I really appreciate, you know, like Matt's intervention and everybody's intervention, because we have a big challenge.
Yes. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Cheryl. I believe that we need to cut it off because I believe that some people might have things to do. But I want to thank you for joining us. I apologize for the technical issues. We at the beginning were talking about one of the things that worry me the most, which is misunderstanding in some places, especially in the US, on what social distancing means. And for me, that's kind of worrying because I see like in the US, people understand differently what social distancing means. So I wanted to highlight that in this forum. And we talked with Matt about it. I'm going to post the video of this video chat in Orinoco Tribune Facebook page and in Twitter to let people know about those things. But it's scary to see people still going outside in the U.S. I understand people need to work and sometimes are forced to work. But things that worry me a lot is watching the beaches in Florida reopen, and in the middle of this catastrophe in the U.S. there is a catastrophe because you have 42,000 U.S. citizens already dead in less than 2 or 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks maybe. So it's crazy, and that affects us also here because that might create, if you don't decide in the U.S. how to properly approach the pandemic, that is going to create a recycling door of the pandemic, not only in the US, but all over, because it's going to be a non-ending story of resurgence and opening and reopenings, and I believe that that's going to be very crazy. But anyway, I want to thank you all for your time, and I promise that I will post the video of the video chat with you. And I believe that the idea of trying to find ways of organizing a general strike in the U.S. is very interesting. I only think that people should start to think very of innovative ways to approach that in the middle of the crisis that we are facing. But I believe that is necessary, Teresa. I'm just talking about what you just said, and also it's true what Carlos said about how to balance, how to balance the health of the population with the health of the economy, which at the end is interconnected. So I believe that the government should try to, of course, as we have been doing here in Venezuela, to emphasize on the health of the population. But at least that's my understanding, and from listening to what President Maduro said, what we have been talking about in Venezuela is that if we see that our numbers are going good in terms of the pandemic, eventually we're going to start opening some areas of the economy to keep the economy moving, and eventually we are going to, Maduro has been talking about easing the social distancing, but he has been saying that it's not going to happen right now. He's talking about weeks in order to achieve that. And he's talking about doing it by steps. And I believe that what he's saying is what the Chinese government has been saying, what the World Health Organization has been saying. So what we have been trying to do here in Venezuela is take that knowledge that is out there and put it into practice. And that's why I believe that Maduro's government has been reaching the epidemic in a very efficient way. So that's it, guys. Thank you a lot. And it's nice to see your faces and to listening to you. And I invite you for the next video chat that we're going to have soon. And I apologize.
Jesus.
Thank you.
Tell me, Nino.
Jesus, yeah, no, I just want to say thank you to all also, but especially to you because you are at the forefront with the Orinoco Tribune, which is a fantastic website and news media. So thanks a lot for that. And I think that its contributions to Orinoco Tribune, you know, would be very, very useful to multiply that work. So anyway, that's all. Guys, thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Hasta la victoria siempre.
Siempre.
Bye-bye.
Bye.